This is the beautiful campus of the University of Pune. The University of Pune had its 97th convocation ceremony on December 26, 2003. The chief guest of this convocation was Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, Director General, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, New Delhi. Dr. Ashok Kolaskar, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Pune, requested the chief guest to deliver his convocation address. Friends, it was a unique convocation address. It inspired not only the young graduates, postgraduates, and professionals of the University of Pune, but also the youth of the entire nation, both at home and abroad. Let us listen to Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar's speech titled, India, the Land of Ideas.
Let me begin by congratulating the award winners, the medal winners. By the way, I found that the applause was rather feeble, was not as good as it should be. May I suggest that collectively we show our appreciation by giving them a thunderous applause. I must also specially note that among the award and medal winners, close to 80% plus were our young girls. I believe they need a special applause too. Let me also begin by extending my wholehearted congratulations and my very best wishes to the young graduates. You're going to enter a new exciting world. You will see a sea change in the economic, political, and technological environment the world over, and especially in India. There are extraordinary opportunities for those who are prepared to face the challenge of change. Indeed, only those of us will survive and succeed who will be able to anticipate the change and also exploit the change. And those who do this will one day lead the change. My young friends, all of you should have the ambition of leading the change and make things happen on our own terms as far as India is concerned. I was in this very campus of Pune University delivering the presidential address of the 87th Indian Science Congress almost 4 years ago. That Congress was a historic one. People of Pune proudly remember it as People's Congress and Knowledge Congress, as you mentioned, sir. One still remembers how charred the city of Pune had become at that time. आपलं पुणे शहर विज्ञानमय झालं होतं त्यावेळी. The mile-long queues of enthusiastic young school and college students around this campus are still vividly in front of our eyes. There were traffic jams, I still remember, from Pune University to Shivajinagar station. For the first time, I believe there were headlines, Science Congress causes traffic jams. In my presidential address, I remember, I had spoken about a new Panchashil for the new millennium, which simply stated was child-centered education, woman-centered family, human-centered development, knowledge-centered society, innovation-centered India. All of us have the right to dream, and I am a dreamer. And only when you dream, then the dreams come true. I remember that I had concluded my address by dreaming about the 21st century India. One of my dreams, and I will quote from my address at that time, Indian brain drain has been completely reversed this year. I'm talking about 21st century India, sometime in the future. In fact, India is in an enviable position of having queues of American and European scholars to join its unique global knowledge production centers in India. The key words that I had used are India's emergence as global knowledge production center, that's one, and the reversal of brain drain. Can this really happen? Or is it just some wishful thinking? I want to assure you, my young friends, that just 4 years after I had spoken these words, India is indeed beginning to emerge as a global knowledge production center, and there are already some visible signs of the beginning of the reversal of the brain drain. And therefore, I have titled my convocation address as From Brain Drain to Brain Gain, Beginning of the New Indian Journey. Let us take the issue of brain drain first. Why does brain drain take place in the first instance? Why do our young students migrate to other developed countries, especially United States of America? I found the answer one day. I was involved in the process of interview for the Chief Innovation Officer of National Innovation Foundation, the board of which I chair. I found that the individual that we were interviewing had experience in branding a product. I said to him, I want to brand my India. How would you do that? He was puzzled. He had branded a soap, a refrigerator, but he wondered as to how he could brand an entire nation. I said, I'll make it easy for you. Let me tell you as to how other nations brand themselves. For instance, United States of America brands itself as a land of opportunity. He immediately replied, I will brand India as a land of ideas. Now here is the issue. India is a land of ideas, but it is United States of America which is a land of opportunities. And that is why our young people with aspirations go to United States of America, which provides them an opportunity to reach their own potential. Invariably, it is assumed that the main driving force for brain drain is economic. People go to the developed world in search of gaining a higher income, physical income to be precise. But I do not think that is the only reason. Otherwise, why would the proportion of scientists and engineers from Japan who went to United States of America and never returned would have increased by 50% in the last 5 years? I was looking at the recent data. Japan is, after all, a rich, developed country, unlike India, and yet they have some amount of brain drain. I believe that for the young people, it is not the physical income, but it is the psychic income that matters much more. Their incentives are not just financial. The fun of creation, admiration received from their peers, the excitement and glory of taking part in the process of creation of something new and exciting, and especially one which can make a big difference to the nation, matters to them much more. That is why a computer engineer works on the challenge of the Param supercomputer in CDAC on a salary that is a small fraction of what you would get from IBM. That is why a space scientist in ISRO works on the satellite launching vehicle GSLV rather than joining NASA. That is why I came back to this country in 1976 with a princely salary of rupees 2,100 per month, leaving aside a prestigious professorship in a leading university in USA that I was then offered. And it is not only me. There are several others who are present here who have done it. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the physical income, it is the psychic income. But then one must realize that these are stories in isolation. The draw for the young people must not just be in Indian public institutions funded by the government. A major draw must come from the massive enterprises of Indian industry. Unfortunately, before India opened up in 1991, in a protected environment, our industry had no motivation to innovate. Under the garb of import substitution, we copied more and more. The situation was so serious that someone, while commenting on brain drain, and it was, I think, Dr. Abid Hussain who said this, commenting on brain drain, had said that if these bright people stayed here, then it will be their brain in the drain. But my young friends, I want to assure you that this has changed dramatically in recent times, especially during the last 2 to 3 years. Let us look at a silent revolution that is taking place in India. India is rapidly becoming a global research, design, and development platform hub for the world. More than 100 companies around the world have set up their R&D centers in India just during the last 5 years. These are not small companies. Many of them, their budgets are bigger than India's R&D budgets. These are not small centers employing 10 or 20 people. Many of them employ over 1,000 people. The biggest would be the R&D center of General Electric at Bangalore. Its current size of 1,600 employees will increase to around 2,400 employees, making it the second largest R&D center of GE in the world. This is what I meant by India becoming a global knowledge production center. What is interesting, however, and this is important, is that around 40% of the 400 or so PhDs employed by the GE R&D Center are young people who have chosen to return from United States of America to work in India. It is their choice. They have not been driven by choice. They have decided to come back to this country. This is happening in other R&D centers too. I spoke to the chairman of NASSCOM, Mr. Kiran Karnik, on the other day. They have done research on returning Indian professionals. Can you believe it? That during the last 3 years, over 25,000 professionals have returned. Over 25,000. Around 90% of them being IT professionals. Many of them have opted out to work in their companies in India rather than in United States of America. I spoke to the CEO of a major venture capital company which exclusively funds biotech startup companies. He told me that 60% of the proposals they have cleared are from young technopreneurs who want to return from United States of America. This is what I meant by the first signs, the first visible signs of the reversal of the brain drain. But are we creating conditions that are truly welcoming the returnees? I believe we are witnessing a dramatic change. As someone who returned as a scientist at the age of 32 to join National Chemical Laboratory in 1976, I can speak from my personal experience. The personal comforts as well as professional opportunities then were unbelievably limited. I remember my wife having to cook on a kerosene stove because we had to wait in a queue for the allocation of a gas cylinder for an year. Of course, I could have got it earlier if I had done something which I refused to do. No more so now. I remember depositing money for buying a Bajaj scooter and waiting for more than 2 years to get one. No more so now. No more wait now. I remember having to wait for a black and white ECTV set for 6 months. This is a story of the past. I remember getting my first telephone connection at home at the end of a wait list of about 3 years. See the contrast. I understand that just last month, 1.5 million mobile phones, 15 lakh mobile phones were sold in India. So the personal comfort levels have gone up. India, my young friends, has changed dramatically. Even on the professional side, there were difficulties, and I'm happy Dr. Sivaram is here. To buy the first imported rheometer after I returned, it took me 2 years. We had to go through this arduous process, Sivaram will remember, of getting not manufactured in India, NMI certificate, and the DGTD clearance, 2 years. The country then had an acute foreign exchange shortage, no more so. Just last week, the finance minister proudly announced that we have touched a foreign exchange reserve figure of $100 billion. It is amazing. It is amazing, my young friends, the change have taken place. Please understand. Just in 1991, we had 1 week of foreign exchange left for import. And you can imagine our having reached these figures, we are prepaying our debt. There used to be an Aid India club, by the way, Paris. And we used to wait as to how much aid they are going to give us, waiting for those announcements. We are saying no, no aid, trade. We have actually loaned $300 million to IMF now. We are helping 10 or 12 nations by giving them aid. India has changed, ladies and gentlemen. I remember coming here, one struggled for a few kilobyte computing power. We now have our own supercomputers. Scientific journals arrived by sea mail and were outdated in our research even before we started. The cyber world has changed all that. I'm as empowered as my American counterpart today. This dramatic change in the personal and professional comfort level continues unabated. This will mean that things will only get better. But the real good news to me is from the side of Indian industry, which is beginning to realize that if they do not innovate, they will perish. Indian drugs and pharmaceutical industry, for example, survived so far by copying known molecules. Now at least 10 Indian companies are inventing their own new molecules by getting into discovery research. I spoke to several pharma industry leaders. Collectively, they are looking to employ now hundreds, when I say hundreds, I mean hundreds of young, bright PhDs. In fact, they are complaining about the shortage of suitably skilled PhDs. Honorable Vice Chancellor should take a note of that. Other sectors of Indian industry are booming too. In auto industry, the wheel has turned the full circle. 50 years ago, it was British Morris Oxford which was being sold as Indian ambassador on the Indian roads. 50 years later, today, it is Indian Indica that is being sold as City Rover on London roads. And Tata Motors will have to stay competitive by displacing their own models themselves so that their competitors do not do it for them. That means, again, innovation at the cutting edge and more demand for creative scientists and engineers. So it is not only the foreign companies, but also the Indian companies which are going to pose greater demands on skilled scientists and engineers. One might wonder, why are the foreign companies, some of whom have budgets higher than India's R&D budgets, are moving their research and development to India? There are several reasons. First, the cost of doing research and development is a fraction of that in the developed world. Last year, the entire spend of India's R&D was $5 billion, less than the R&D budget of one company like Pfizer alone. A dollar in India delivers so much more than anywhere else in the world. Indian advantage, however, is not just the cost, but cost cum competence, considering the huge talent pool that we have. I heard a presentation by the chief executive of a German software company set up in Bangalore on the other day. He showed that the idea generated per employee in their Indian outfit in Bangalore were on the average 3.5 times higher in their outfits elsewhere in the world. It is amazing. So this Indian mind is so creative, so much more creative than anywhere else. That is the advantage. Second, there's a world-class technical manpower. India has 250 universities, some of them so eminent like Pune University, 1,500 research and development units, several IITs and engineering colleges. India has the world's largest chains of publicly funded R&D institutions like CSIR. They're an extraordinary rich source which was underutilized even within the Indian space of research and development opportunity. Third, the trend is also being fueled by the shortage of research and development personnel in some emerging high technologies areas in industrialized countries. The companies have to bridge the demand-supply gap in skills by external outsourcing, obtaining access to high-quality scientists, engineers, and designers. That is on the top of the agenda of many major companies. The fourth reason is that R&D in high technology industries, such as biotechnology, microelectronics, pharmaceuticals, information technology, new materials, has become highly science-based. The costs of doing research and development are increasing phenomenally. Can you believe it? That to put one new drug molecule in the market takes a staggering rupees 30,000 crore today. That's a huge cost. And moving to highly skilled but lower cost countries like India, of course, is one solution. There are other reasons too. There is increasing pressure on shortening international market penetration times for new products, shortening R&D times, decreasing the market lifetimes for new products. Therefore, multiple geographical and organizational sources of technology with increasingly differentiated and innovation-specific patterns of diffusion have become a rule rather than an exception. And in such outsourcing, for most of them, it is destination India now. What would be the impact of the creation of these global knowledge production centers in India on brain drain? One school of thought is that there will be gradual reversal of brain drain. A normal Indian scientist would love to stay in India, provided he's given a challenging job here. He would love to have his children grow up here in India. All this would become possible for him as India becomes a great research and development hub, with world's best companies doing their most challenging research and development here in India, whether it is Intel designing its latest chip or General Electric designing its latest aero engine. But again, it is not these companies alone from outside India. Our own auto companies too will be designing the next versions of an Indica or a Scorpio or a Pulsar in India to become, to beat the competition. The pharma companies, our own Indian pharma companies, will be designing new molecules, exploring new mechanisms to win in this competitive race. So there will be challenges galore for our young innovators. For some time now, there's been a deep concern about the declining interest in science in India. This is reflected in terms of lower enrollment in science and also those who study science deciding not to stay in science but move away to other lucrative careers in finance, in marketing, in management, and so on. But with these new exciting opportunities opening up, the demand on science in India itself will increase enormously. This will lead to the demand on the creation of new human capital, both in numbers as well as quality. The present production of 500 PhDs annually is too small for a country like India, which is 1/6 of the humanity. This number had not grown since there was no demand on science in Indian industry. Of course, with some notable exceptions, this number can be raised several folds. This will augur well for India. The Indian industry will itself benefit in the long run. The researchers who will work in these non-Indian innovation enterprises will acquire insights and skills which are difficult to acquire. All such Indians resided abroad so far. No more so. In the coming years, they will prefer to reside and work in India. The Indian industry will benefit from the supply of superior R&D manpower trained in advanced R&D tools as well as management techniques. Let us look at another angle that is going to emerge. An average idea can only give an average product. This average product survived in the seller's market in protected India before 1991. As you know, our industry made gums that did not stick, but we bought them. Our industry made plugs which did not fit, but we bought them. Our industry made cars where everything other than the horn made noise, and yet we bought them. No more so. The customer now has the choice to buy the best. Therefore, we have to create a winning product which can withstand global competition. That can come from a winning idea. But such winning ideas will come only from creative people with the highest intellectual energy. What is the distribution of intellectual energy across populations? There are scientific studies in the literature to address this question. Last month, I read a brilliant paper by Gangan Pratap in Current Science. He argues that ecology of the intellectual process throws up outstanding scientists and inventors in a pyramidal and a power law fashion. Let me explain this further. In 1926, the distribution of scientific productivity was analyzed by A.J. Lotka of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. The result of Lotka's investigation was an inverse square law of productivity, by which the number of people producing n papers is inversely proportional to n square. This means that for every 100 authors who produce one paper in a given period of time, there are approximately 100 upon 2 square or 25 who produce 2 papers. Similarly, there will be 100 upon 10 square or 1 who will produce 10 papers, and so on. Interestingly, the same law, by the way, applies to patents too. I believe it was an analysis of semiconductor patents, Dr. Sivaram, that you sent to me. Same law applies. In pre-liberalized India, we were happy to use the services of an average researcher who was capable of producing that 1 paper or 1 patent per year. But when we are competing globally, we will require those individuals who are capable of producing those 10 papers or those 10 patents. It certainly appears that technological creativity and productivity, just like scientific creativity and productivity, lies in the minds and abilities of a relatively small number of highly talented individuals, like the Einsteins are rare and the Edisons are rare and so on and so forth. We lost our Einsteins, we lost them to the Western world so far. For instance, the cream of the cream of the cream from IITs kept on going abroad. We comforted ourselves by saying that if we lose a small number, what difference does it make? It doesn't really matter. But we did not realize the implications of Lotka's law, that they were the ones who made a huge difference to economies abroad. We did not realize that when we lost 1% of our top talent, we lost 90% of the intellectual energy. We watched hopelessly because we had nothing to offer to these creative people. Ladies and gentlemen, my young friends, no more so. We have plenty to offer now as a challenge, as I have articulated. As Indian industry becomes globally competitive, it will require people with skills which have to be, again, globally benchmarked and will have to be globally sourced. Thus, there will be enhanced competition among institutions and also both Indian and foreign industrial R&D centers to seek the best brains to work for them. This will automatically mean that NCL, that CSR, like institutions, will really have to create an intellectually stimulating, rewarding, and a hassle-free environment to keep these researchers with them. Indian industry will have to offer competitive salaries and challenging and fulfilling jobs, matching with those offered by foreign R&D outfits. Competition will draw the best from everyone and will benefit everyone, especially the scientific community, in terms of more challenging opportunities and vastly improved remuneration. Another implication of India's emergence as a global research and development hub is linked to India's positioning in the Committee of Nations. Just imagine, around 1/3 of the new knowledge of major firms around the world being produced in India. Take this fact, along with the crucial dependence of the big economies of the world on this new knowledge. It is obvious that India's interest in international fora cannot simply be ignored by these large economies, as all this critical knowledge capital will find its abode in the human capital that will reside in the innovation centers located in India. As you can see, India's emergence as a major global knowledge production center as a huge social, cultural, political, economic, and strategic imperative. Our government, realizing all these imperatives, will have to play an even greater role to influence the turn of events, both positively and proactively. A sustained commitment to investment in science and technology, to strengthen the research infrastructure, and I'm very proud that it was here that you will recollect our Honorable Prime Minister made a statement when our science and technology budget was hovering around 0.7%. He said in the Science Congress address that he will raise it to 2%. They were not mere words. He has kept his words. Ladies and gentlemen, within 4 years, it has gone up from 0.7% to 1.1%, and it is going up even further. Those words have been kept. We'll have to move on that. Similarly, development of capabilities to rapidly integrate new knowledge and technologies into products, gaining strategic access to growing global source of innovation, creating government-driven incentives, protection of intellectual property extended to science-based high technology inventions are some of the key steps that will have to be taken. Let me conclude by reminding you about the Goldman Sachs predictions which came up just about a month ago. These Goldman Sachs predictions are for the year 2050. It is predicted that India, along with China and USA, will be the 3 top economies of the world. That's what Goldman Sachs say. Going further, I can confidently predict that if India plays its cards right, by 2025, it can become the #1, the most powerful knowledge production center in the world. Finally, my friends, let me assure you that it's a great time to be an Indian. It's a great time to be an Indian. Let me assure you even more that it's a great time to be in India. Enjoy being a part of the action in this land of great past and even greater future. My best wishes to you, young friends, for the exciting journey ahead on that limitless ladder of excellence. Let your journey up this ladder bring unprecedented glory to this great country. Thank you very much.